Welcome to the first Woodpark community meeting of 2024. My name is Sue Milburn Hopwood, and I'm the president of the Woodpark Community Association. And I just wanted to check, can everyone hear me okay? Great. I have a loud voice, and rarely am I accused of not being heard, but sometimes on Zoom land that happens. Anyhow, you'll be hearing a lot from your association this year, as we have quite a number of initiatives underway. First of all, we're redoing our association bylaws, and I know that's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it's pretty important because we need to do that by October to comply with new provincial legislation governing not-for-profit organizations. And over the next few weeks, residents will have the opportunity to review the bylaws. We actually just passed them earlier this week, and they'll be posted on the website tomorrow. And as part of this new not-for-profit legislation that we have to do the bylaws for, we also need residents to sign up to become members of the association. And it's not a big deal. You just have to provide your name and your email, and it doesn't cost anything, but people will be getting emails, and they'll get a little postcard in the mail, and they can drop it off easily, and it's an easy thing to do, but it's just something new that we've never had to do before. Free of charge, and we're not planning on having a charge or anything in the future. This is just a process. Another thing we're doing that's maybe a little bit more exciting is we've got an objective set to plant 100 new trees in Woodpark by this coming fall. And there'll be opportunities coming soon to buy a tree for your backyard, or sign up to get a free tree from the city. So stay tuned for that. In April, we're going to be having our Spring Fest in the park. It was a big success last year. We had a great weekend weather-wise, and hope we can have good weather again for that. In May, we will be having our annual meeting where we'll be approving our bylaws, and there'll be other things, movie night in the park and all of the usual things, but that's some of the things that you can expect in the next little while. And we have a new revamped website, and urge you to go and look at it. It's woodpark.ca, and if you forget the address, just Google Woodpark and it'll pop up. So you can get information on all of these initiatives and our blogs and the chats by going to the website. So I urge people to look for that. So on to tonight's meeting. I'm very pleased that so many people, and I see the names, some of which I know and some of the ones I don't know, popping up on the screen. I'm glad that you can come for this very important discussion on the Lincoln Field secondary plan that is going to shape the future of Woodpark over the next 20 years and beyond. I think we're going to have our councillor join us, and I don't think she's joined us yet, but she will join us, and she will make a few remarks when she joins us. After I finish these introductions, we're going to go over to Jocelyn Cadeau, and maybe Jocelyn, you can put your hand up so people can see you. He's the intermediate planner with the City of Ottawa's policy planning branch, and he's the lead planner for the Lincoln Field secondary plan, and he's the one that's going to be making the presentation tonight. Jocelyn's also accompanied by Peter Giles, and Peter, wave there, great. And Peter is the senior planner with the planning branch, and he oversees all of the work on the secondary plans, and he's the lead planner for one of the neighboring plans, the Pinecrest Queensview secondary plan, just to the south of us and west. And so that's another one that's happening at the same time. Now, the Woodpark Community Association has been following the plan for the last few years, and participated in a couple of meetings this fall. So we've got, that's the board has done that. And based on what we've seen so far, we provided some comments and expressed some of our concerns in a letter to the planners, and they got it earlier this week. And that letter actually is on the first page of our website, so if anyone wants to look at it now or print it up after or look at it after. But as Jocelyn goes through his presentation, he'll hit on some of the points that are raised in that letter. Then after the presentation, we'll have the opportunity to do some question and answers, and there'll be two ways of asking your question. One, you can ask it verbally, and you put your hand up, and actually if you go to little buttons on the bottom of your screen, at least they're on the bottom of the screen for me, it might be someplace else for other people, but there's a button called reactions, and when you push reactions, there's an option of putting your hand up, and that way we can tell who wants to speak, and we can have some order to people speaking. And the other way, if you think of a question, you just want to ask it kind of during the presentation, or you think you might forget it by the end, there's a chat button where you can just write your question, and we'll try to get to both sets of questions. We're going to put everybody on mute for Jocelyn's presentation so we can go through the information so we're all kind of on the same page, and then we'll go to the question and answers. And finally, I just would like to acknowledge that we also have Kathy Vandergriff from, who is the president of the Queensway Terrace North Community Association, with us tonight, and this plan affects that community as well. And I'm glad that she could come as an observer tonight, and just want to let people know that she's here, and there's a lot of common interest between the two. There she is. She's waving. There's a lot of common ground between the two organizations. And for those of you that don't know where Queensway Terrace North is, it's essentially the area south of where the Metro and the Rexall is. It's that community south. And it has the two plants it's involved in. Anyhow, it doesn't look like we have the councillor yet, and I know she's often running from one meeting to another. So let's turn the virtual mic over to Jocelyn, and we'll hear about the plan.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Sue. Just to clarify a little bit, whenever the counselor does join, would you like me to kind of pause the presentation to give her a chance, or we hold off her remarks closer to the end?
No, we'll let you go through it, and then I'll go to her before we go into the questions and answers.
Oh, no, sounds good. Yeah, so thank you, everybody. As you mentioned, my name is Justin Kedzier. You can say Joss if that's a lot easier. And I am the file lead for the Lincoln Field Secondary Plan. Sorry, just adjusting my Zoom, pardon me. Yeah, and so I want to thank you all. I want to thank Sue and the team for inviting Peter and I out tonight to speak to you on the Lincoln Field Secondary Plan and how that'll impact the Woodpark community. So with that, I'll start us off with a land recognition. So Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Today, Ottawa is home to approximately 40,000 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Ottawa's Indigenous community is diverse, representing many nations, languages, and customs. The city honors the land of the First Peoples, as well as all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in Ottawa, and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. So now, for some of you, this might be your first time hearing about a secondary plan. So I'll give you a bit of spend the next two slides kind of going a bit over of what they are and what their intended function is, and kind of where they fit within the planning regime, and how they contribute to city building at large. So they are a statutory policy document under the Section 16 of the Planning Act, this provincial legislation, and are part of the city's official plan. So they give the city a more direct hand in guiding growth and development for a community, particularly a community that's expected to see significant change. So in this case, we've we've started the process for the Lincoln Field Secondary Plan in response to the anticipated and imminently opening boat train station. So this is an area where we expect to see quite a bit of development over the next 25 years. And therefore, this gives the city an opportunity to study and to analyze the area to make sure that whatever development eventually comes forward, that we've provided a policy context that better fits the local context. So this is refined policy direction at a community level. And what that direction can look like is establishing building heights and looking at permitted land uses that best fit an area. Secondary plans identify desired community amenities. So this includes identifying locations for conveyed parkland whenever there's redevelopment, and can direct improvements to the public realm and mobility network. So looking at where we want to see pathways and cycle tracks and such. So once the secondary plan is adopted, the policies apply to all new development applications in the area, and so, or within the precise study boundary. And so these policies become the rule upon which we evaluate development. So a development application comes in, they must demonstrate how they conform to the policies. So they are a long-range planning document that have a shelf life of 25 years that they forecast out for a 25-year period. So planning in Ontario cannot, the longest range we can plan for in Ontario is 25 years. So a secondary plan is really the longest range planning exercise we are able to do as a city. And so for that reason, they establish high-level policy direction, high-level rules, and the long-term vision for development. And because of that, because they forecast out so long, they're really early on in the process, and they're done at this macro scale. And so they look at a neighborhood, they look at a community, look at the different neighborhoods that are involved, and see how it ties within to the surrounding neighborhoods, into the surrounding larger area, and to the entire city ecosystem at large. And so for that reason, they are very high level, very macro, and are very much at the foundation, if you will, of the planning process. And so for that reason, a secondary plan won't have all the details, nor should it. We shouldn't have the refined details today of something that could happen in the next 15, 20, or 25 years. There's still a lot of studies that need to be done whenever after a secondary plan, and that's done through individual development applications or specific city projects. So most likely what we'll see is development applications that come forward, whether that's a zoning bylaw amendment or a site plan control application. And these applications will produce studies that determine and that refine the detailed direction. So that includes traffic studies, looking at the traffic impacts of a specific application, looking at landscape plans, so looking at the greenery and the soft landscaping, wastewater servicing capacity, so to make sure that the proposal doesn't increase capacity, or then looking at where we convey parkland dedication, and then ideas for, and then the final designs from an urban design and architectural perspective. So then these studies are all done later on as there are individual development applications that come forward. So the secondary plan is ahead of that, but sets the foundation for these to occur at a later date. So secondary plans on their own do not initiate or trigger any projects, but are implemented as part of private development applications. And so it's for that reason that they really lend themselves to incremental change. And things, so a secondary plan policy until an external actor comes forward and says the timing is right, the money is right, the economic conditions are right, that's when policies of a secondary plan are enacted. So they are policies that are eventually acted upon. So with that, I'll get into a bit of the purpose of the Lincoln Field Secondary Plan. So primarily it's these are the five, I'd say the five main functions of the plan. First of all, I'll say is with the arrival of transit, it's really to improve connectivity and access to transit. This is the O train is the city's greatest infrastructure investment. And a big part of our mandate is to ensure that people can access the O train. But access to that transit really requires the active transportation facilities, so like sidewalks and cycle tracks, to make sure that people can get to transit. And then, of course, we want to find ways to improve the public realm and public spaces such as parks to ensure that we have areas that draw people out of their homes to spend time and engage in their communities. This third point is really crucial, is to increase the supply and diversity of housing options. I don't think we can open a local news article without seeing the sentence, Ottawa's in a housing crisis. Even yesterday, just the federal minister of housing made a public announcement about how cities really need to work on their to improve the supply, to increase the supply of housing and housing starts across the country, and particularly in areas around transit. And so this is something that through the Lincoln Field Secondary Plan, or not even just the Lincoln Field Secondary Plan, but really citywide, that we're trying to do is to find opportunities where we can increase the opportunities for housing. And with increases in density, with more housing, of course, comes the amenities that support these new dwelling units and these new homes. So part of the secondary plan is to provide a variety of non-residential amenities, so that commercial and retail component and other uses, of course, for the surrounding communities. And so density and amenities really go hand in hand. You can't have the amenities without the critical mass of people necessary to support those businesses and make sure that they're viable. We also can't have a lot of people without the amenities there that they rely on, that they depend on. So they really go hand in hand. And finally, it's to clarify the city's expectations and improve the predictability of development outcomes. And although a secondary plan is, again, there's still a lot of details that get determined later on through future applications. A secondary plan does give an idea of how a community will shape, how an area will grow and evolve by kind of giving a bit of by building a large box, if you will, to yeah, a bit set the stage on what that will look like. So now I'm going to talk a bit about Woodpark specifically, and actually I'll take a sip. Sorry, I'm not sorry, John, already. Oh, but yeah, now I'll talk a bit about Woodpark. So I have a slide focused on challenges facing Woodpark, and then at my next slide, I'll talk about the opportunities for Woodpark. So through my meetings with the community association, through consultation efforts, through my discussions with the council and her staff, through my own time walking, like the multiple times I walked through the area, and the various emails I receive, the thing that really comes up is the lack of parks and green space in the area, and that many of them are currently unusable because they're staging areas for the O train construction. So you've had 3 significant parks and green spaces that are no longer usable, and that's a devastating loss for a community. And although they will be rehabilitated after the O train construction, that's still years to come. So that's definitely a tough loss for a community. And what parks you do have are pretty inadequate, at least for a community your size. Notably, the No Orchard Park, although it's very cute, has a great play area, has beautiful mature trees, is rather small. Next is the Woodruff Park, and a nice park with some nice recreation amenities is on the other side of Woodruff, and I talk a bit in the slide about kind of how that's not an ideal location for your community. And then there's the Common Ground Community Center on the NCC's green space, and is not technically classified as a park. And although the NCC is a good neighbor, a park has certain protections under provincial legislation, and because this isn't a park and because it's not city land, it is more in a more vulnerable spot to be in as relative to if it was a proper city park. There are too few sidewalks and cycling facilities in the area. When I've been walking there, it's been sharing. You share the roadways with cars, and I was talking in the previous slide about the importance of connectivity to transit. And in this case, and because with both New Orchard to the north and Lincoln Fields to the west, there's no real sidewalk connection to bring somebody really reliably to those stations. There are wastewater and stormwater infrastructure limitations. There's a lot of swales in the area. The local pipes are not at capacity, but they're getting a little older. They're nearing capacity. So there's definitely, as redevelopment comes along, there are concerns about what the pressure that will add to the existing infrastructure. And this next one is not necessarily a problem or a challenge from a city building or a city planning perspective, but does have a huge impact on your quality of life and what it makes to experience living in a neighborhood is all the construction that's been going on in the area, particularly as it relates to the LRT. There's a lot of active and passive and negative impacts that come from construction, but of particular note, I mentioned earlier, is that this construction took away your parks. So that's a huge decrease in quality of life. Next, and so this one is both a challenge and an opportunity, but at this point I'll focus on the challenging portion of it is the proximity to the major roadways. So you have Carling, Richmond, and Woodruff that are major arterial roads to the northeast and south. And then with the Kitchissippi-Mekong, so the NCC Parkway to the west. These all present various public health issues from an air quality perspective, and especially with all the traffic, with people idling, that definitely brings on a concern for air quality. And then for pedestrians and cyclists as well, crossing these streets is not particularly comfortable. I've crossed Carling, Richmond, and Woodruff, and Carling, that's crossing 6 lanes of traffic. I've crossed Carling at a proper intersection, and even that was stressful. Richmond, I've crossed a fair number of times. I've jaywalked for this one. I know that, don't tell anybody. And I didn't feel particularly safe. And then Woodruff wasn't too bad, but again, these are not streets that are particularly comfortable, nor would we want children to cross them. And the Kitchissippi-Mekong is inaccessible to pedestrians. But so yeah, these are a bit, they really lock in the neighborhood. Next are the opportunities for Woodpark. So something that's really interesting and actually very, very unique to Woodpark is the access to rapid transit. Woodpark is, and I haven't done a full analysis of every neighborhood in the city, But Woodpark is set to be one of the best served neighborhoods in the entire city by by LRT, with New Orchard Station to the north and Lincoln Fields to the west. Not only do you have access to two stations, you will have access to two lines. Lincoln Fields is where lines 1 and 3 will converge. So if ever Stage 3 gets funded, that'll be access to Barhaven and then further south there. And then same with Stage 3, that'll be access to Stittsville and further into Canada. But yeah, so this is really premier access to LRT. And then, yeah, and so I'd say about 95% of the neighborhood is either within a 600-meter radius of one or both stations. So it's really, really unique to Woodpark. Next is Carling Avenue. So the 2013 version of the Transportation Master Plan, which is the one that's currently in effect, identifies Carling Avenue as having for light rail transit. We're currently updating our transportation master plan with the transit portion coming out in 2025. So who knows if that'll still stay as LRT, but right now there's plans for a LRT station at Carling and Woodruff. So there's having 3 stations or 3 major lines really cover your northwest and your south. It really sets you up to have premier access to rapid transit. Next, and I was mentioning a weakness is that there are too few sidewalks in the area, or that it's a bit of a challenge and a barrier. Something that's coming up as part of the 2020 or the recent update to the transportation master plan. So we have the transit update that's coming out in a few years, but this past year in 2023, we had the pedestrian and cycling projects that have that list of projects that's been released. And Edgeworth and Woodland and Lawn Avenue have all been identified as roads that will receive a sidewalk. Edgeworth and Woodland provide that north-south connection. So Edgeworth connecting Carling and Richmond, and then Woodland connecting Carling and Byron, and really bringing forward that access to Richmond Road, to all the amenities there, and then that access to New Orchard Station. And then Lawn Avenue from the NCC's green space all the way to Ancaster, which will provide that connection to Lincoln Field Station and also providing cross-neighborhood connectivity. Woodpark also has high tree canopy coverage. I love to hear that. Yes, you mentioned at the beginning that there's going to be a program where you're going to plant 100 trees in the area or give out trees to your neighbors. That's freaking awesome. And then it will increase the high tree canopy. And I don't think I have to tell you the benefits of living in an area with a high tree canopy. So that's definitely a positive in the area. As mentioning before, that there's too few parks in the area, and whatever parks you do have are kind of on the periphery, or either unusable and on the periphery. And wherever there will be a new park is through redevelopment. So this is a principle across the city in terms of getting a new park, is that we receive parks from redevelopment. So we have a tool in Ontario called parkland dedication. So this gives the municipality the right to acquire land upon redevelopment from a developer. We usually get about 10% of their land area and use that, and that is given to the city, and then the city makes a park. This is our primary way to create new parks, and so this is done for typically the sites of a usual size, roughly around 4,000 square meters. Actually, you're getting a new park at Carling and Ancaster that was 2175. Carling, there was a zoning bylaw amendment there that was approved just last year, and they're currently in the process of getting their site plan approved. And once their site plan is approved, then that land will be conveyed. The land for a parkette will be conveyed, and then there will be a new park on Ancaster. The other way to get a new park, or for any smaller redevelopment, so if you see more semis or townhouses, instead of giving land, they usually give cash in lieu. So this is a cash of up to a certain value of the property value, and that is then contributed, or that is put into a pool for a citywide pool and then a ward-wide pool. And then at the councilor's discretion, whenever that ward-wide, the council then has the discretion to spend those ward funds for either improving parkland or to even acquire land to create a new park. So these are really the primary ways we build parks in the city, and really stems from the principles that growth pays for growth. Something as well that's actually interesting and unique for Woodpark is your proximity to other adjacent development. So there's the former Lincoln Fields Mall, the current Metro site. We're actively as part of the Lincolnfield Secondary Plan. We're working with them on their master plan, and there will be two large parkland blocks there that will be accessible to you and to everybody. But then further east is the Carlingwood Mall, and that's about, I believe, a 10-hectare site. It is a really big site, and although I have not been in discussions with any developers, I suspect there will be a development application coming in like maybe the next few years, potentially 10, 15 years, where they will definitely, whenever they redevelop, be conveying a park. And then there's a lot of properties on Carling Avenue that are fairly large, and that whenever they redevelop, there will also be opportunities for parkland there. Another opportunity for Woodpark is the close proximity to non-residential amenities. And these next 2 points kind of go hand in hand. But Carling and Richmond are amenity-rich roads. There are these corridors with a lot of non-residential uses. Then there's the Metro Grocer, the Metro Grocer at the Farmer Mall site. There's the Farm Boy further down Richmond. Then there's the Shoppers, the McDonald's, that commercial plaza, also further down Carling. And then, and so there's quite a bit of and a wide variety of types of uses in the surrounding area that people can access to fairly conveniently for walking. And then the easy access to major roadways. So Carling, Richmond, Woodruff are all important roadways for drivers, and say it was the Kitchissippi-Mikan. And so it's these are ensure intercity travel and pretty convenient access for car users and drivers. Oh, my tea's still hot though. So now I'm going to talk about kind of some of the ideas that are being brought forward by the secondary plan at large, and discuss a little bit about their impacts on Woodpark. So I'll start with we're looking at a new Kitchissippi-Mikan intersection with Carling. So as you know, the existing intersection is a trumpet intersection where you have these big ramps on both sides of Carling, both to the north and to the south. And through our discussions with the National Capital Commission, with the NCC, we've learned that in their short and medium term plans, they would like to see the removal of the southern ramp. So if you can see my mouse on my screen, it's their plans to eliminate this ramp. And something that we've also found out, and something that is paid for in part of the scope of work for the Stage 2 project, is the removal of the transit way. So we're potentially seeing a lot of asphalt being removed south of Carling. And because the transitway is being removed, and if we're cleaning up, removing all this asphalt here, there's an opportunity to also clean up a lot of the asphalt on the north side. So to straighten out the Mikan, to bring it to roughly where the current transitway alignment is. The details are still being figured out, but kind of bringing this general configuration, freeing up a lot of land to the west of the parkway. So what we're looking at is we're studying the possibility of a signalized intersection to control the signalized intersection on the current bridge structure. I won't get into the details of the bridge. There's a whole other part of this that relates to the bridge. I'm happy to talk about it more in the Q&A. But for now, that we're looking at a signalized intersection right here. We've retained a transportation engineering firm who's conducting a traffic study to see what the impacts will be on cars, what forcing people who want to head east to take a left turn lane going north, what that will look like for queuing, and then is preparing an intersection design to respond to those impacts. So it takes me to my next slide. So what we're trying to do here is to free up a lot of land. There's currently a lot of land that's being locked and that's not being used to its full potential around transit. And so tidying up a lot of the road infrastructure, the car infrastructure here frees up a lot of land. We're also trying to improve pedestrian and cycling connectivity to the O train. So we have this train that's right by to a highway interchange, these big loops that is quite a deterrent for pedestrians and cyclists. And right now, Carling is not a safe access point for pedestrians and cyclists. And so what we're trying to do here is to create a more of a balanced approach. So right now, the priority has been for cars, and pedestrians and cyclists have been largely ignored for Carling Avenue. And we are trying to balance that out to make sure that pedestrians and cyclists have a proper access and have a safe and reliable access. And as part of this work, we would require that there would be cycle tracks and sidewalks on Carling that connect to the existing pathways and that connect and to the surrounding neighborhoods. And so there's a lot more I can say to this. I'm happy to answer a lot more questions in the Q&A. But also, we had an open house for the Lincolnfield Secondary Plan back in November that was recorded for the councillor, and the councillor has shared that presentation on her website. So there's a lot more details and information on a lot of the other pieces. This is a really, really quick summary of it. So if you want to learn more, either we can talk more in the Q&A, or I encourage you to watch the video on the council's website. And so, as I mentioned, there would be a lot of land that would be freed up with the removal of the Kitchissippi ramps, so which presented an opportunity to create residential development parcels close to the O train. So again, and this idea, or not this idea, this fundamental need of housing people near transit. This was a really exciting opportunity for both the city and the NCC to explore this. So what we've been looking at, we've looked at and identified 4 potential development parcels on the NCC's land, 2 of which would be within the current ramps. So the development of these would be conditional upon the successful removal of these ramps if that proves to be viable, and the other 2 would be a bit more ready. One would be south of Richmond Road, west of the Mikan alignment, and then one east of the station and west of Edgeworth. And if there would be redevelopment here, this would be part of the Woodpark community. And I'll get into this specific parcel right now. And so back in 2018, this piece of land just beside 2385 Carling was identified in a staff report as publicly owned land by transit that could be used for affordable housing. So this block of land has been on the city and the NCC's radar for a long time as somewhere where we could potentially house people. We're looking at a walking distance of probably 75 meters to transit. It is intimately close. And so through our discussions with the NCC, we've talked about like what kind of heights would we consider, what kind of lot depths we would look at, what kind of, and they're still way too early. It's still way too early for them to know any details on this. But at a high level, some of the permissions that they were excited about was having at least a high-rise building along Carling Avenue, so fronting on Carling, with heights potentially up to 40 stories. This is a height that is usually reserved for properties that are very, very close to transit, as it would be in this case. I will add a lot of caveats, though. This is, this is, as I mentioned before, like very much the first step in a very long process. The NCC is not a particularly fast body, and so I don't even think they haven't begun thinking about this. Right now, it's just a conversation to get the land use permissions in place so that whenever they are ready to think about it, to get a development application forward, that they have that conversation can at least happen, because we'll have the policies in place to allow for some kind of residential. In terms of the number of buildings, in terms of the lot depth, we are still discussing with them. We're trying to get them to commit to something, but they've been really hesitant, and so we still don't yet know, but we'll have a better idea by the time the secondary plan gets circulated for public review. But something that I can assure you tonight is we've told them very strictly that we will be requiring transition. So kind of that they can't get, there won't be a bunch of towers in the stretch here. There will be, the tallest building will be along Carling Avenue, and that will step down, and there will be a transition as we move further north and closer to the neighborhood. Something else to note about all of this is because they would be developing a residential parcel, they would be required under the Planning Act to convey parkland. So there would be a new park, there would be a new park whenever they come forward with a development application. So that is definitely something to benefit both the future and the existing community. Now I'll talk about Carling Avenue. So the official plan designates Carling Avenue as a Main Street corridor. The secondary plan proposes to keep that direction, so we're going to keep the Main Street corridor designation. And so a corridor is a stretch of land that's intended for high density mixed use development. These are areas where we want to see a variety of non-residential uses. These are areas where we want to see people on local streets come down to get to them to access what they need and then to use them as corridors to travel to their destinations. Carling Avenue already has some residential, already has some non-residential amenities, so it only made sense for the secondary plan to keep that desired direction. Because there's some funny parcel sizes here, and there's already some existing residential. So one of the real opportunities for development is the at 2249 Carling, and actually I got an email about this just 2 days ago. From a resident in the area about what do these heights mean, and we're looking at potentially heights up to 30 stories on Carling, but what does this mean for the people who live to the north in the established low rise? And so, as I was mentioning, transition, that's something that we're very mindful of, that the secondary plan will be very mindful of, is the ability to transition so that the buildings don't dominate the existing low rises. So we have a tool, what we call in urban design, what we call the 45-degree angular plane. This is a tool that's used to measure, to determine what is an appropriate height when a new tall building is proposed to be near an established low-rise neighborhood. And so this is literally just we draw a line at a 45-degree angle based on different heights. It's not a perfect methodology. So there's different ways to measure, but it essentially gives a cap on what is deemed to be appropriate from an urban design perspective. And yeah, so with that, I'll get to, and this is actually my last slide. I moved through this presentation a lot quicker than anticipated. But so now we'll talk about the neighborhood portion of Woodpark that's within the secondary plan, and that's the west side of Edgeworth. And this is something that I've talked about with Sue, that I've heard, gotten some feedback on from the community association on, and I suspect will be a topic of discussion in the Q&A. But the portion of Edgeworth that's north of Lawn Avenue between Lawn and Richmond, we're proposing low-rise heights. However, for the portion of Lawn Avenue of Edgeworth, Lawn Avenue all the way to Carling, we're entertaining, or we've done a bit of a review, or not a bit, we've done quite a bit of a review, and are considering heights up to a high-rise building up to 18 stories. And so now that's kind of the outcome, and I'll explain how we got there and explain the rationale. And
Jocelyn, I think you said Lawn, but I think you meant Edgeworth.
Oh, I meant south of Lawn, on the west side of Edgeworth.
Oh, okay.
My apologies. But yeah, so on the west side of Edgeworth only. And so what we're seeing here, and I'll kind of explain how we got there. So as I mentioned with the NCC site, this is an area that's very close to transit, and a priority for us as the city is to find opportunities for housing near transit so that people so that people have the option to live car light, if not car free at all, or car free altogether. And so any residential parcel near a station is by default of interest, is interesting for us. And so go to any part of the city, we see a station, we see residential nearby, it's being looked at, it's being understood, we want to see what is appropriate. And so in this case here, looking at the stretch of Edgeworth, something that all of them are within about a 250 to 300 meter walking distance from the station. That, for our purposes, that's within a stone's throw. That's very close to transit, and so that's a first point in its favor for for meriting higher densities. The others, that these are very deep lots. These are unique residential lots in the city for being quite deep. We have an average lot depth of about 56 to 60 meters, whereas the typical neighborhood residential parcel is between 25 to 30 meters. So, and a deeper lot means that there's more room to play with whenever there's a tower that comes up, that there's room for amenity space. There's room for, that there's enough room to adjust, have different building configurations and articulations. So it makes it that also that any tower that does come can be further away from the parcels, from the properties on the east side of Edgeworth, so that they're not they're not as close. So that's the second point, is that these are uniquely deep lots that are close to transit. Something that held us back a little bit was that there are no sidewalks on Edgeworth. This was something that, yeah, if people came to live here, that it would be very inconvenient or unsafe for them to share the roadway to get to transit. So that was something that held us back. But then seeing through the transportation master plan that a sidewalk is coming, and that rekindled the interest of looking for greater densities here, now that there would be some safe, reliable pedestrian connections. Then something else is that it's between two Main Street corridors, Richmond and Carling. As I mentioned, are main streets that have a variety of amenities that the people who live here will be able to access. Grocery will be able to access medical services, access groceries, access other healthcare, even recreation and fun. So there's a variety of things to do, and so it would be locating people near near a variety of non-residential uses. Something else that's another point is with the potential development on the NCC's land, looking at a 40-story building there, something that I respect may not be appreciated by the community, but at least from an urban design perspective, having a 40-story building, but a 2-story building is very jarring, makes for a very stark contrast. And so having this 18-story building, or potentially some kind of taller building, at least doesn't have to be 18, to break up that transition does make it a lot easier to absorb density. It's way less striking. It's from an urban design perspective, it adds that progressive transition to the neighborhood. And so I know the argument more density helps minimize the density may seem funny, but it is an urban design principle. And yeah, so these are the many, so these are the points in the favor of why we believe there's a good rationale for increasing these heights. I will note though that on their own, these parcels are too thin. They would be too thin and too small on their own to accommodate a high-rise building. So we are looking at having a minimum lot size requirement in order for this to happen. So that would mean lots would need to be assembled. So there's 11 lots here that are being looked at. One of them is owned by Ottawa Community Housing. That's the parcel right south of Vaughan Avenue. And from my discussions with them recently, there's no plan in their medium or long term to redevelop. So there's really only 10 parcels at play. And so we're looking at a minimum lot area requirement of 2,500 square meters. And so whereas a typical high-rise building only needs 1,800 square meters. So we're looking to increase that minimum lot requirement so that there's enough room between buildings, so that there's porosity, that there is a lot more sunlight access, that there is room for amenity spaces and pathways to connect to the green space and so on. So how we got to 18 stories. So I mentioned the 45-degree angular plane earlier for Carling. So 18 wasn't a number that was picked out of a hat. We actually spent a lot of time working to get to 18 and have built quite a rationale for it. And so using from the properties on the east side of Edgeworth, we measured using the 45-degree angular plane, and we took it at different heights at different measurements, and consistently got heights between the 16 to 21 story range. And so, and the 18 stories is what we're calling the modest high rise, is a new height category that we're looking to introduce that we've been introducing through secondary plans and are hoping to introduce citywide. Is a new height category that we thought, okay, that now given the angular plane, this works well within this new height category. So 18 stories was a ceiling we were comfortable with that leverages a good urban design or an urban design best practice that we are able to comfortably rely on and say, okay, this is a height that makes sense given the proximity to transit, given the proximity to the neighborhood, and so we can work with this. Something else is this area does have existing tall buildings. Although the corridors are very different, have a different function and different characters than the neighborhood, there are tall buildings and there's mid and high-rise buildings in the area. So another piece to all of this is, as I mentioned, residential parcels near transit, particularly the LRT stations. pique interest, and so we are not the only ones who notice the potential here. We've had developers reach out to us, expressing their interest in developing on this stretch of Edgeworth, and we've had some meetings with them, and every time we meet, we get pulled to 40 stories. They're like, we want 40, we want 40. And every time we very firmly say no. That is an undefensible height. That is something we can't rationalize. Given the neighborhood context, given the function of a neighborhood, given our urban design tools, we can't make 40 does not make sense for us. And so yeah, so we've been holding strong at 18 because that is something, again, using our angular plane calculation is something we are able to work with and rationalize. So just before we get to the Q&A, I will say that these parcels are unique, and this is a unique opportunity. And so there's a reason why we're here trying to leverage some more density that this is not we don't see opportunities like this. And so it is important, particularly in a housing crisis and a climate crisis, to leverage these opportunities where we can. So with that, I want to thank you all for the time, for giving me space and time here tonight to present to you. And I want to thank Sue and the community for the Community Association for letting me speak. I will say before we get into the Q&A, if you have any questions about your specific property, I don't think this is the appropriate avenue to do so. Feel free to reach out to me. We can set up a meeting directly about anything regarding your specific property. I would hope the Q&A is more related to the secondary plan ideals and the kind of the policies at large. So thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for a very detailed presentation there. And I've now sat through 3 or 4 of these, and we've never had so much tension on Woodpark and got into some of those granular details. So before we go on to the Q&As, I see that Councillor Kavanagh has joined us, and in fact, I think she joins us just as Justin was starting to speak. So, but I didn't really want to interrupt the flow. So, Councillor Kavanagh, thought you might want to say a few words to put this in context, and maybe build on some of the points that Justin has made, and then we'll go into some Q&As.
Well, thanks so much, Sue, and thanks for everyone for coming out and spending some time this evening looking at this. There's a lot of work that has obviously gone into it, and it's frankly, it's pretty mind-blowing. It's quite the change from what we are now, all driven by Stage 2 LRT. I'm pretty excited about it. I know there's going to be some things that will not be as popular, but other things that will be very popular. It's a real mixed bag. I think that it's a lot to absorb. So you're lucky, Sue. You've been through it a few times, and you probably pick up more information each time as you go. Lots have changed. You know, when I started as a counselor, the city wanted to put a sidewalk on Edgeworth on the south side going to the high school, where there's already a sidewalk. They insisted there should be a second sidewalk there. And I was arguing, well, what about the other side? There's no sidewalks. It struck me as strange. There's a lot of change of mind of thinking, because it was more logical, especially because this is the side where there's going to be more people going to a station, not just talking about kids going to high school. So I'm just recalled that as we were talking about the priorities. There's still a few that I want to see Anthony have a sidewalk too, by the way, as an entry point into the community. I think all the entry points should, especially because that's going to be high traffic for students in schools. So that should be on the list, and I don't know why it's not. It's you know, I've heard loud and clear about parks, and the importance of parks to Woodpark. You're called Woodpark. So we're looking at it every which way. I was just talking to Parks and Rec earlier about that issue as well, trying to strategize. You know, like, let's face it, there's only a couple ways you can do it, and one of them would be to take down houses and or something within the limits of Woodpark, and create a park that way by buying up the property. I know that's been done in Kitchissippi, but it's usually pocket parks, similar to what you have. So trying to look at options. And of course, the other one is looking at NCC and seeing if they're willing to play. And I know it took a long time to get that garden going, and it was a big effort, and it was very positive. I thank everyone who was involved in it because it really makes a difference to the community. Big thanks to Jocelyn and Peter. They've done a ton of work. They're constantly listening. There's just so much change going on. By the way, I was a little bit late because I was at the Ukrainian hall because they're interested in looking at their property as well. And they're right across from the Sherbourne station. So I had to go and chat with them just briefly because they had some time tonight. So much is being looked at, and these are opportunities, and I'm glad that everyone here has come out to participate and ask questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And interesting, another high rise in the Ukrainian church location. I think there was a lot of ground covered, and as the councillor has said, you have to. It takes a while to process some of these things and think of the questions. But I'm sure there's some people out there that may have questions. Would anyone like to go ahead and ask a question? There's two ways. I'll just remind you. One is to put your hand up, and I see Valerie's got her hand up, so I'm going to go to her in a minute. But also, you can take your question in the chat. And David Levesque, who I should have introduced earlier, who's visible there, and I think everybody knows David because he does a lot of our social media, and anyhow, he will be monitoring the chats there if anyone wants to put their question in the chat. He'll read them out. So, Valerie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Jocelyn, and Peter for the work that you've done, and Teresa for your advocacy for our community. I have to admit that I sometimes when I hear these things, I'm feeling nauseous, I'm feeling anxious. Change is I live in a development that created some havoc in the community before I moved here, when it was first built, because it was one of the infills. And then, I see the problems at 1190. They don't have enough space. I don't know when they were built. But one of the things, the questions I have is just right now, just to start off, is that at the beginning of all of these meetings, there's always a land acknowledgement at the start of the presentations and all their meetings. We do it at our office as well. What Indigenous consultation has taken place, or has taken place, or will be taking place for the lands and this development? Because when I see the plans, it's taking away green space, but promising green space, taking away trees that we've already lost a lot of trees, be it to LRT construction or to the derechos and weather events and everything like that. And then also, we're an aging population. So part of our community, there's a big boomer community that is, unfortunately, we're going to die. So, there's going to be space available. And so anyway, but my primary question is what consultations have taken place, or are they required for this development?
Yeah, for secondary plan work, we don't require Indigenous engagement. And so to be frank, at this point, no Indigenous engagement has been done directly with Indigenous communities. There's quite a process at the city in order to engage with the host nation. And we were originally advised not to because of at the scale, it wasn't necessarily deemed appropriate to engage with them. The federal government does have a different requirement. So whenever they will be, it has a different requirement. So whenever things happen on their land, they have a significantly different process than we do, and will, to my understanding, their process will be required to engage with Indigenous communities. But it has not happened in a formal way through this project. There have been Indigenous people who've attended events, but not representing the host nation or any of their communities in an official capacity.
Yeah, I can know because we have Indigenous groups that are engaged with the Woodpark community gardens. So, you know, and so they're you know, we want to honor their legacy, and we want to honor the space that we have and protect it, because you know what, once it's taken away, we'll never get it back. You know, and then, you know, we're going to have at the last presentation, I was really impressed with the RioCan presentation, because they have been, you know, obviously they started a few years before, because I remember going to those meetings, but you know, with their plan, with the 40-story towers, they're taking into consideration the step backs, etc., adding the green space. But they also, the vision was, and that's what they said, was a community. They're going to build a community with a main street. And when I see the plans that are presented to it, is there consideration for the existing community and our social makeup of our community at Woodpark for these plans? Because it just seems as, you know, if green space and pavement is taken away, let's put a building there. And I just wondered if that's a consideration.
So in terms of so as I meant, so RioCan presents a really interesting is an interesting example, because they are effectively navigating a development application process in tandem with the secondary plan. And this is what I was mentioning a bit before, that a secondary plan kind of being this high-level document that the details we don't know the details as they come forward. And so RioCan being, we're doing a master planning exercise with them through the secondary plan process. But for the federal government, they would be undertaking a very similar exercise as they would whenever they're ready with their development, or any other significant landowner in that regard. So that's why RioCan comes forward with a much more cohesive vision, why they have detailed drawings that have regard for where various entrances will look and having an engaging relationship with the main street, is because they're further along and ready to start thinking about those things. Whereas typically at a secondary plan, there is some of that gets done, but those details are unknowable until we start getting architects and urban designers and traffic consultants who all focus on a specific area. So I'd say that. So whenever I point to the NCC, because they will be the largest landowner moving forward as this comes along. Whenever they start retaining consultants, whenever they start initiating the project, they will be doing a if not identical, a very similar process as RioCan, where they'll establish visions, they'll establish objectives and community guidelines and things that they'll respect. So that's why it's different, is that RioCan is just much further along.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the questions, Valerie. We'll go to Heather next, and maybe Heather, you could also tell us what street you're on if you're comfortable doing that.
Of course.
And then after that, we'll go to one of the written questions. So Heather, on to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thanks, Jocelyn, for doing the presentation with so many details. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Woodpark for getting everything organized. My family owns one of the houses on the west side of Edgeworth that is right smack in the middle of the 18-story potential area. I mean, we are original Edgeworth people. I mean, this was all farmland over 100 years ago when my family got that property and the property next to it, which is no longer in our family. So we have a lot of history in the area, and we have a lot of interest in our homestead specifically. So what, over the next 10 years, as development proposals come in, what are we going to be looking at as a process? Is it going to be appropriation of land? Is it going to be specific developer private requests to purchase our property, that kind of thing? What are we looking at as options?
So in terms of expropriation, absolutely none. The city will not be the city will not be looking to acquire any land.
Cool.
So you're good from there. I can't stop a developer from knocking at your door. So that will be onto them in your relationship and your business partnership with them. And then in terms of a public process, whatever happens here, again, we'll have to undergo a zoning. We'll definitely have to go a zoning bylaw amendment, which is a public process, and then a site plan control application, which, although is less public than has different pathways than a rezoning, does have a public consultation component to it. So there will be, particularly at the rezoning stage, there will be opportunities for you to engage with the landowner or the developer and have your say in, or at least, share whatever feedback you may have with them.
Would the developer start that rezoning process? Would they apply to the city and say we're interested in approaching the individual landowners, or would it be the other way around? Once they have gotten buy-in from us, would they come to the city for rezoning?
Yep. So so anybody is able to do a meeting with the city to see the potential for a site on any land that they don't own. However, they would be however only the landowner or their authorized agent can initiate a rezoning amendment, or the city, sorry, but either the city or the landowner and their authorized agent can initiate a rezoning process. So nobody, unless it's me coming in and saying, Heather, we're rezoning your land to this, it's up to you or somebody you deem to do in your place.
Right. So if a developer, for example, got buy-in from, you know, a majority or even half of the other people in that 11 or 10 house row, they could, the developer could say, we own half of it, we've purchased it from the private people, we would like to rezone the entire section, or would they only be able to make a case for the section that they own?
Correct. Only the section that they own. They would not be able to,
Cool.
And because of the minimum lot requirements, they would be, because of the minimum lot requirements, depending on where you're located, that could eliminate the ability for another tower, depending on where you are, because they would need to have consolidated parcels to do so.
Right. Yeah, and fascinatingly, we are right in the middle of that. So in a way, it's interesting that it's sort of a linchpin position as to whether anything larger than, you know, the current houses would go in. What about if somebody came in and said, as part of the transition, we can't get enough of the parcel to do an 18-story. Is it the sort of thing where they could say, we'd like the 40 tower and then a 5-story building and then back down to the 2-story buildings that exist there now?
Yep. So so 18 is a ceiling. It's 18 is a ceiling, and I believe the minimum height in this case, I believe, would be 2 stories. That's under. So between 2 and 18 is where people could play with and develop for.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much. That puts it in perspective for those of us who are private owners. Thank you.
No, of course. And something to add, Heather, is there's from our discussions with one of the developers, we would be looking to introduce a policy or to require that they have some kind of easement, public easement, so public access to the space. So an additional connection beyond just lawn or carling that would be leveraged and used by the neighbors.
So their section would have to have walkways so that we wouldn't lose our access to the NCC land. Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem. It would be up to the NCC to then have that connection, but at least because we can't get them to build on the NCC's land, but that connection will be there for whenever the NCC is ready to formalize the connection.
Thank you very much, Heather, for the question. It's so interesting to know that your family has been here for so long. We are actually looking for some pictures of days gone by and what the community looks like. So we may be in touch with you to see if you can help us out on that. Great.
I have a question from the chat. Michaela Ferguson has asked, has any thought gone into air quality and heat sources? Carlingwood Mall is a great heat source, and with more buildings and therefore less green space, our neighborhood will get hotter.
So in terms of so we have our climate change group that's actually looking at some new initiatives there. I know trees, for example, being one of the best ways to mitigate heat and to mitigate the urban heat island effect. So that's and then different buildings as well, or different building materials tend to are being used. We have this starts getting in the weeds of a technical process, but we're on the verge of implementing these green standards. They're called the high performance development standards. These have requirements for tall buildings to use specific materials that kind of reflect heat, that mitigate minimize the heat that is retained in a neighborhood and a community, and that has passive impacts on the surrounding buildings. Those are still not fully implemented yet. The province has drawn a few hurdles that way, but they are coming. In terms of actual heat capture, in terms of actual heat deflection, otherwise, that's I think a global problem. That's not just a problem that we'll face here. However, for any development that happens on the Carlingwood Mall, it's currently a parking lot. A significant part of it is cement in a parking lot. I would imagine that any redevelopment would require park space, would require tree planting. We have specific requirements to plant trees in the right of way, to have trees in new parks. And so I think whatever actually ends up happening at the mall, at the Carlingwood Mall, will actually mitigate or produce a lot less heat than what's currently there, or rather retain a lot less heat than what's currently there. And I see Peter muted himself, so maybe he has something to add.
Sure. Just to add something, Joss, unfortunately, most of our leverage lies with additional development. And this is a case where, pointing to Carlingwood Mall in particular, where, this is a development from, several decades ago, and just looking at those parking lots, it becomes obvious that it kind of shows its age. We now have better, stronger policies and guidelines around, Joss mentioned the street tree planting, but not just that, but even parking lots. So in the new plan, even we embedded new policies speaking to aisles with tree-lined aisles and low impact development measures and so on. So as we see development, there will be improvement in the program.
Thank you, Peter and Jocelyn. David, do we have another question, written question?
Valerie Hexmeyer is asking, it is my understanding that the Ottawa landfill is almost at or over capacity. How does this impact the planning for intensification in Woodpark as presented?
So the Ottawa, I'll be upfront, I don't really know. I know we've been updating our waste master plan. Sorry, Pete thinks he's my supervisor, but this is actually my real boss. Yes. So I know we're updating our waste master plan, and potentially perhaps Councillor Kavanagh has something to add there. I'm not sure. I have not been involved in those discussions.
Yeah, well, I am on the Environment Committee. It's not at capacity. It's going to be at capacity in a number of years, and that's why we're talking about upping people recycling, etc. All that makes a difference, and it's very important to do all those processes, and we're also looking at other options, but it's not right now at capacity. We're trying to get further away from that point by stretching out, by reducing. I'm not sure what your point is about related to development. Are you talking about like from demolition waste, that kind of thing?
No, actually, it's as you add more people, it's great, because I've been in some of the meetings where the waste reduction, where they want to encourage multi-residential units that were built before recycling, to get those people to recycle and participate in the green bin program, etc. But as you add households, you also add waste. So there's waste. Mm-hmm. There's human waste, and there's also waste from garbage. Like, people just produce a lot of garbage and leave a heavy imprint. So the concern is that when you start adding people, you're also adding garbage and waste, and that has to be picked up and delivered and deposited somewhere. So yeah, it's just one of the things on my mind.
yeah, multi-residential buildings are in focus right now. That is what we're planning to work towards for recycling, composting as well. And so that's all in process with the master plan. We're examining all those issues. And there's a lot of will on council to move forward on that. And in terms of more people, this is one point, and I know Jocelyn will make this point too, is the more people we have in the urban area is better than if we spread them out. We're growing anyway. We're growing in population, and the more people we have in terms of intensification, we're better off, and we're probably going to be better at recycling, etc., when we are closer, because we'll certainly have to be more conscious. We need efforts from all levels of government, of course. If they started doing a serious job on banning plastics and over packaging, that would help us great, because we're the ones that end up having to do everything at the municipal level. But we definitely want to go in that direction. I'm very big on that. That's why I wanted to be on the environment committee. And no, we have to keep reducing. Absolutely, every conscious effort you make, and there's a will. People that are living in multi-residential buildings are now asking, please, we want to be part of this, and that's great news.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go on to another. We've got some more questions. People are being shy, I think. But David, do we have another written question?
We have a question from Ian McCallum, who is a current board member.
I found these results.
Sorry, my Google Home is interjecting here. Ian asked the question, why is the Carling property line a zigzag at Richardson to Hartley and then to Edgeworth? Ian, I'm not sure I understand your question, so you may want to weigh in and clarify.
Share a map that clarify. I know what Ian is talking about. I mean, if Ian wants to jump in, please, but I can share my screen and show what he's referring to.
I think Jocelyn knows. It's kind of self-evident, like it coming west from Woodruff. The property goes long at the Kelly's funeral home. Then the next one over is, multiple houses deep, and then there's multiple properties associated with the tower that's at Wentworth. So how did those additional properties get included? And the concern obviously is, in the long run, developers will have now figured out that they need to target Woodpark because of transit and intensification. So how will the city justify that jagged property line versus, not going even deeper?
So so what this is years ago there was a zoning study, a rezoning that was done to rezone these properties to arterial Main Street. This was before my time. And so these properties here have currently, as of right in zoning, heights up to 6 stories. This is this was done years ago and is now their existing height permissions in the zoning bylaw. And the zoning bylaw is applicable law under the Planning Act. So that's all they need is, so they can just go get a building permit for something for 6 stories and be legally compliant there. So what this is so there's a hatching here. That this is just identifies that we are looking at. So this is not to say that this would be one property parcel, but signalize that there's greater densities here, and that if these were to merge, if these were to assemble with the Carling parcels to frame the corridor, that there's the potential here to increase their heights. Of course, there would still have to be transition to the neighborhood portion. To the neighborhoods, to the low-rise neighborhood to the north. But these, so these would have to merge essentially with a parcel that directly fronts onto Carling. So in this case here, a few of them would need to be assembled with this yellow parcel here, and a few of these ones would need to be assembled with. Well, this is an existing 10-story building, so it's not likely that these will actually this will actually redevelop. We're not a city that or at least not yet anyway. We're not a city that demolishes tall buildings. So there's not a good chance that these will redevelop or at least be part of the Carling corridor. However, these ones here east of Hartley have if they were to assemble to create a parcel that's big enough, would have the possibility for a mid or a high-rise building that has that corridor condition that frames the street, that would transition to the north.
Right.
But there's six. They have zoning for 6 right now.
Correct. As of right, zoning is 6 stories.
So if I'm not mistaken, Homestead is now the property manager of the 10-story at between Hartley and Wentworth.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in my previous conversations with the Manor Park guy, he had actually looked at getting the homes that are associated joining his property. So have these additional properties already been assembled, or are they unassembled?
They're unassembled, and I have not had discussions about these properties, so I am not aware of anything in the works.
Well, I assumed that Homestead was in your meeting.
They have not reached out.
Wow, because they have multiple properties in this collection.
Mm-hmm. And they have not reached out about a specific opportunity. They have attended meetings, but I've not heard from them.
Oh, okay.
The other thing too is, maybe they would demolish this building. I don't think we've seen much of that happen in the city, or at least not to my knowledge anyways. We're not there yet as a city. Maybe in 50 years or so, when a lot of our mid and high-rise buildings reach 100 years old, we might see more demolitions, but it's not a current trend in Ottawa.
No, that's okay. And just kind of continuing on this theme. So Kelly's is to the east of Richardson. The cursor's on it. And so would that mean that the Walsh property line, that it would have to be stepped down? So you might have like 14 in the front and 6 in the back?
So let me get up to that. I'll include those. Actually, I'll zoom out a little bit. I'll include the legend. So this orange color is associated with up to 9 stories. So that's considered a mid-rise building. Mid-rise buildings don't have the same transition requirements as a high-rise building does. So it could be 9 stories from front to back.
So what would this, for instance, so you can see all the little tiny strips on Walsh there. So those are, for all intents and purposes, 3 stories with a peak.
Yeah.
And so they could have 9 stories butting onto their property line?
Correct.
Maybe just to add something, I mean, there are some urban design guidelines for mid-rise buildings that are currently in the works. Our colleagues in the urban design section of planning. So when those are released, we'll see what they have to say about transition. I suspect we will be seeing guidelines that will introduce some transition requirements. But like just like I said, it's not the same as high rise. The 45-degree angular plane is specific to the high rise guidelines, the transition between high rise and low rise residential. So in this case, it's a bit of a gray area at the moment until those guidelines provide more clarity.
Right. Well, and I would just say, if you want neighborhoods to be willing participants in intensification, then you need setbacks in those transition strips to make it palatable, so that people don't lose the streetscapes that they've enjoyed for a significant amount of time.
And so that is something that so there would be setbacks. Every property has a setback, of transition and setback. Although a setback is a transition tool, they're not. There are other ways, or sorry, there would be setbacks from the property. It wouldn't necessarily just abut the wall. We would have to, but we don't know those details yet because there's no active application. And again, a mid-rise building would go through an urban design review. And
Sure.
there would be considerations for for the impact on the neighbors, for an inviting streetscape as well. Because this is a corridor, any building would be required to front Carling. So the bulk of the building would be towards the front of the street. Um, and so most likely, I think from a logical design perspective, we would most likely see an amenity area the further north we go, closer to Walsh. I mean, I only speculate. There's no designs to go off of, but that's kind of
Right.
the thinking here, is that the building would be, along Carling with whatever amenity space to the rear.
Right, but and if we keep the business end of the building on Carling, whether it be the front door or the driveway or the parking garage, then that would also diminish the amount of traffic that goes into the community. And then, for instance, trying to navigate one's way around to say Flower as an exit or to Allison as an exit. So that, like, our neighborhood is losing exits going on to Richmond Road. So if we're constantly inviting people into the neighborhood because the driveways are in the back of the buildings, which means access off of Richardson, Hartley, or Wentworth, then we're also inviting those cars to then travel through the neighborhood in order to find their way onto an arterial road other than Carling. So if we get everyone in on Carling and exit out of Carling, then we'll diminish the amount of cut through traffic trying to navigate their way to the small number of exits through the community. Does that make sense?
No, I hear what you're saying, and maybe Pete can jump in a moment, but a direction. So more driveways on an arterial is something that through the new official plan has been deemed not desirable from the city's perspective.
Mhm.
That's more cars that come in that have to make that right or that left turn. I guess you wouldn't go left here because of the median, but that in general on an arterial road that becomes a lot more dangerous for the people coming out, for having more private
Right.
approaches.
Right. But if you think about the way that the traffic patterns, excuse me, are already set up from Maitland to Carling, all those buildings front onto Carling. And so what happens is if you look at our block from Woodruff down to the Parkway, there's only the streets that really have a lot of the traffic flow going in and out. And so it's the traffic in that section of Woodruff is really quite fast. So if you wanted to slow down the traffic, then having turners is how you slow down traffic. If you want to maintain the speedway, which is like from light to light, as is the current pattern, then you would flow everyone onto those side streets, and you'd create transitions as there is at going into Woodland with the turn lane.
So I'll just jump in here. I completely understand the point. We do want to slow cars on Carling, and we don't want to put through traffic through the neighborhood. But this is exactly the type of thing that's looked at as part of individual development applications. There are traffic studies, and they do traffic counts, and there are engineers who look at exactly those details.
Right.
And then if the cars do come in off the side street, then there's other things they could look at, like, are there ways of discouraging cars from continuing to the neighborhood? Sometimes there's traffic calming introduced there to do that, or there's other strategies. But also just to reinforce Joss's point, so your considerations will be weighed with the ones raised in the official plan, where it's hard to see it right now because Carling is so hostile to pedestrians and cyclists. But when Carling is eventually reconstructed and there is rapid transit on Carling, there are street trees and sidewalks and cycle tracks. We don't want to have all sorts of driveways cutting across these facilities. It becomes dangerous for people walking, cycling, biking, wheeling, and so on on those facilities in Carling. So that's why the OP discourages that. So that will end up being weighed against the particular circumstances here as part of an individual development application.
Right. So
Okay,
I've heard about
thanks.
Carling being a complete street for nearly 5 years. So what is the current idea about when that complete streeting will begin?
I wish I had good news for you, but we really don't know, Ian. It's not currently a, well, you know, we're waiting for the TMP roads. The next part will be roads and transit. So, you know, we'll see, but I wouldn't hold my breath. That the reconstruction of Carling will likely come with the introduction of rapid transit, and that will really depend on funding from the province and the feds.
Okay, I think we'll move on to a few other questions, and we are kind of getting late on our meeting, and I will just put Justin a bit on the hook about what are the next steps of this. So, but we'll go through the other questions, and then we need to kind of cover kind of what's the timelines on and where do we go from here. So, I think we have a few more questions. Maybe it's a question from Celeste. David, can you read that?
From Celeste McKenzie, what if any steps are being taken to attract new residents who do not need or want to own cars? For example, thereby reducing or eliminating minimum parking spaces in buildings and instead allowing builders to determine the number and use of what would have been parking spaces, to build adequate bike rooms, provide space for shared cars, car services, etc.
No, so I love that question because this is yeah, I see Councillor Kavanaugh smiling. Yes, this is exactly what we're hoping for an area so well served by transit, is that people who want to come here don't can use like commute auto whenever they do need a car, and will rely on transit and walking. The secondary plan, I want to bring forward a policy that says that there are no minimum parking requirements for the entire plan area, so that whatever parking is provided is done voluntarily. We are currently, as a city, undertaking a new zoning, creating a new zoning bylaw. So this is a massive undertaking that will, and parking is regulated through zoning, and so is bike parking. And as part of this project, and Peter and I have been privy to some chats about kind of what's being brought forward there. And so there's a lot of exciting stuff, and some of it is confidential, so I can't get into the details, but there's a lot of exciting stuff coming. We do have official plan direction. So the official plan is the overarching policy document that directs what the zoning bylaw will look like. Again, talks about reducing parking minimums or eliminating them altogether in certain areas around transit. But the Lincolnfield secondary plan will have a policy that does not require minimum parking. And similarly to the RioCan site at 2525 Carling, so the former mall site, we are introducing parking maximums. In terms of bike parking, we're seeing increases in height, increases in bike parking requirements throughout throughout the city, and we'll most likely see more as well through the new zoning bylaw.
Councillor Kavanaugh, did you want to speak to this question?
Just briefly, I'm on planning committee, and I can tell you that developers are quite happy when parking is, you know, reduced. It's expensive to build parking, so they tend to lean towards having less parking. In fact, we get pushback on that too, of course, from residents, that they're thinking people still own cars and park it on the street. But in fact, the maximum of developers that are coming through committees, and I'm seeing them every couple of weeks, are reducing their parking. And I've even seen zero. I've seen zero parking. So that's a trend, especially near transit. And it's obviously an incentive for the developers. The only exception is if they're a little further out and you don't, in your area, they'll want to build less parking because they They know they can still rent or sell if it's a condo, because they know that all those things, those features are there. It's a win, you know, it's part of the evolution. It's coming. We have to keep, we're trying to make the atmosphere so that that can happen.
Thank you for that. And I should just add though, like not everybody's jobs are actually accessible by transit. I just looked at my own child, could never get to her job from where it is. So there are, look, there's a range, and I guess people then live closer to their where they work. But that we're in a transition, and there still will be a need for some parking for some people, or some parking that people can use as a parking lot or something like that. So, but that's a big other question that's beyond the scope of this this meeting. But we're not going to have too many cars, but we're going to have lots of walkers. And I think the next question is related to sidewalks. Maybe I'll give David's voice a rest, and I'll read this question. Ever since I moved into the community, this is from Ryan, I've been wondering if there's a reason why Woodpark has so few sidewalks, and why is the city planning to build only 3 new sidewalks in the future? And maybe I would just add to it, and when are those sidewalks going to be built?
Yeah, so in terms of the sorry,
welcome to CRBC.
my cat got activated. It got hyper. So in terms of the transportation master plan, I'll start that we are very strapped, like any public body, we are strapped for cash. Sidewalks are expensive. We like to think that although they're probably the least expensive piece of infrastructure, all infrastructure is very costly. And through the transportation master plan, it's a citywide policy document. It's city funds that are allocated citywide, and they're done based on a needs assessment, looking at various concerns, particularly looking at equity concerns. And I will say Woodpark is actually only 3. Yes, fair enough. However, looking at other neighborhoods, Woodpark's getting 3. That's compared to other neighborhoods. That's a lot of that's quite a lot of sidewalks for the transportation master plan, and where so many resources are already very tight. So it's and I totally understand that it's not enough. The council was mentioning Anthony would really need a sidewalk for the connection to the school, and she's absolutely right. And every single local street should have at least 1 sidewalk, and we now have policies in the official plan that for every new local street, or whenever we do reconstruct a street, if ever we have to dig up to improve any of the stormwater servicing and whatnot, we will rebuild with a sidewalk. But the transportation master plan, has only identified 3, and that's only because there's only so much money to go around. There is the possibility in coming years, the federal government a few years ago released or did an active transportation fund that municipalities could tap into, and sidewalks are a candidate project that qualify for that funding. We in Ottawa got some funding for various sidewalks, various sidewalks and projects. It's not clear yet if or when the federal government will do something similar in future years, but it is something they've done once, so hopefully they'll do it again, and we can bring forward future candidate projects for that funding. I don't know if Peter or the council have more to add.
I was just going to add, since everybody's in the computers anyway, if anybody wants to look at that list, you can just Google search City of Ottawa Transportation Master Plan Active Transportation Project List. So that was released just last summer or fall, and you'll find a table there. So I'll repeat that. So City of Ottawa Transportation Master Plan Active Transportation Project List. So you'll find that, and there's a table that shows the proposed pedestrian and cycling projects as part of the next TMP cycle, if you will. The next step is to prioritize them and to put them into different affordability brackets. So usually that's broken up into 3 different, oh, perfect. There's the link. Thank you, Joss. It's usually broken up into 3 different time segments, and then based on availability of funding and priorities, and the projects will then be kind of turned into official projects and given a timeline and an estimated cost and so on. But there's a lot more work that needs to go into that. So we're not there yet. So we don't know when those sidewalks are coming, but as that work happens over the next couple of years, we should find out.
Okay, I think we're kind of moving into what I think is the rapid fire part, where we have quick questions and answers, because we really, I think people are getting tired of time to turn to finish up here. But there was another question about parking and the fact that whenever we build in these apartments, then we have a lot more problems with street parking because people still do have cars. And we're seeing this already here in Woodpark. And this is probably not a Lincoln Field secondary plan question, but like, how and when do we start the planning on what the parking regimes will be like on the streets? It's almost like we need the secondary plan, but then we need the plans for each neighborhood as the development happens. So what's the process for that?
Well, and that's where I was saying at the beginning, that it really comes down to the individual development applications. They come forward with their traffic study or their traffic impact assessment. And depending on if they provide parking or not, they that will have an impact on their contribution to the local traffic. And if they're leasing units or selling units without parking, that is something that is disclosed to a buyer. So if there's no parking opportunity, then hopefully that unit goes to somebody who doesn't need a car. This is really figured out as individual applications come, where we know the number of units coming for a specific lot and so on. So it's too early to tell at this point. So it's only whenever there's a prospective builder.
Thank you. Councilor Kavanaugh, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, well, they mentioned the part about snow clearing as well. And there's parking bans for when there's snow clearing. So people get ticketed if they're leaving their cars on the street during those times. Parking actually slows down traffic, by the way. So that's a well-established phenomena. But in terms of changing parking, if you really don't want it on your street, you can start petitions too. The process is available right now. But that means nobody can park there, including yourself. So those are options that can be looked at street by street. We've had that come up a lot for Woodpark, and if you don't want cars parked on your street, you can ban them altogether. But if your neighbors agree with you, be careful what you wish for. That means, a lot of people that you were hoping to have park on your street just to drop by or visit also can't park. So there's different options. We can't, if people park too long, of course, there are limits and there is bylaw. So there's all kinds of options open on how to control parking.
And just to kind of add that, we've started some work within Woodpark. We did a survey actually to find out where we're having problems existing with parking, and so we will start moving forward on some of that. Another quick question: will there be requirements to have businesses in the first floors of some of these high-rise buildings? Is that actually built in that's required?
So right now the proposed direction is to require that along Richmond Road. Richmond Road is kind of the logical progression of like we kind of get Hintonburg, Westboro, Wellington West, then the Sherbourne area, and so it's so the policies would require non-residential uses that grade of along Richmond, as well as within the master planning work that's being done at the Lincoln Fields Mall site. So there's going to be a north-south street that connects Carling and Richmond, and there would be a requirement to have non-residential uses there. Carling, although we would definitely we would encourage non-residential uses, there won't be a requirement in the same way. And the reason for it is, and this is something we've been hearing, have been hearing from developers and also seeing across the city, is a lot of vacant storefronts. It's been very tough, particularly since the pandemic, to find a lot of commercial tenants. So we don't want to have a strict requirement for retail everywhere, because in the case that they can't be filled, and then that takes away the potential for housing and just having an empty storefront. So if a developer sees it's viable, then they're more than welcome to do so, but it would not be something, at least for Carling anyways, would not be something that we would require, but we would on Richmond.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question about Carling, and it's just like, you know, sometimes I think that the essence of this, it's almost like a highway now and not very friendly for people to walk on and certainly bike on. Like, what is the vision for Carling?
So yeah, that was Ian brought up the Carling Complete Street, and at this time that's not in the books. We'll see what comes out from the roadway and transit update from the Transportation Master Plan in 2025. But in terms of what we're, at least for the secondary plan, what's happening with the parkway, with the Kitchen City Mikan, the work that's being done there is really intended to ensure to improve pedestrian comfort on Carling. So if the ramps are removed, then and through that new project, we would then require that cycle tracks and sidewalks are built that connect then to the NCC's pathways, that connect to the existing and the planned sidewalks. And because Edgeworth is getting a sidewalk, that sidewalk would then be required to connect to Edgeworth, so connecting to Woodpark, and then would connect further west to the Lincoln Fields Mall site. So it's not a huge plan for all of Carling necessarily. That's a very problem significantly bigger than the secondary plan, but at least for your community does provide improved safety, particularly on the north side of Carling. And maybe Pete, I see you want to have something to add.
Sure, I could just add that I think there's something that a lot of people aren't aware of, and is that in recent years, the city of Ottawa has gone through and updated its road cross sections. Those are kind of the official, essentially the blueprints for how we do our streets. So we've updated the cross sections for arterial roads and collector roads, and you can find those documents online. Essentially, the good news, actually, and locals as well. That was just recently done. I think it was finished up last year. So the good news there is that all arterials and collectors now get cycle tracks. Okay, so that's just a given. So we don't need to have a separate specific vision at this point to say, Carling needs to be a complete street. We know it's going to be a complete street. There's a complete street policy, in fact, for the city, and we have those cross sections, that ensures safe pedestrian cycling facilities. The trouble we have is that we don't have the funding to make it happen, and usually it doesn't happen until the pipes need to be replaced. So the big question is, how do we accelerate that? And there's some work happening right now with the Transportation Master Plan to try to find ways to get complete street funding, specifically for streets that don't need to replace their pipes yet, where we can come in and do this work just for the sake of improving conditions for all users, and not just because we have to improve, update the pipes. So it's that's not easy, because we all want to see these streets transformed sooner rather than later. So that's where we're at right now.
But likely the most likely to happen in the short medium term is whatever happens as part of the reconfiguration of the intersect of the parkways, where the parkway meets Carling.
Right, so we'll get a short segment of it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've had a good exchange of questions and some concerns. I think, but I think we've had a lot of information today. I think we will have opportunities to comment as the official plan as the study comes out. But whether Peter or Jocelyn maybe just speak to a little bit of those next steps, and how does the community association, how do individual members input into when we see something in print?
So yeah, that's a great question. So we are nearing the end of the process. We are closing on bringing forward the secondary plan to Planning and Housing Committee. However, before we do that, we do need to circulate the policy document and all the mapping for a 28-day period. So that right now is anticipated to be done at some point in March. yeah, right now we're aiming for March. We're currently working on getting another secondary plan to planning housing committee first, so we'll see how the dates work out that way. But yeah, right now we're looking for March. And so that would be out for public review, where the public will, and that will be published on the project website. The public will be able to review the policies. There'll be time after that review, that circulation period, where people can share their feedback with me. We can have meetings, discussions on some things if there's any policies that stand out to you. And in the interim, like right now, if you go to the project website, which Pete, would you be able to put that link in the chat, the Engage Ottawa page? Thank you. There's my email on the project website. And if there's things that I saw, there was still a few more questions in the chat. So if you want to send them my way, you can send me an email. Yeah, so you can share your feedback with me that way. I received a bunch of comments. There was a bunch of comments that were submitted through the chat of the public open house that I'm sure many of you that echo a lot of your concerns. I'm still working my way through. It's about a 10-page document, so I'm still working my way on providing a response to every question. But once that's ready, that will be published on the project web page as well, so you can take a look at the questions that were brought up then. But yeah, so I guess the next step for you folks is either reach out to me directly with comments or questions, and then be on the lookout for whenever the policies are circulated for review.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And for the Woodpark committee, clearly we'll be using our website and our blog function to tell people that those documents are available. And I'm sure the councillor will be doing that in her newsletter as well. And that we'll have some collection of thoughts within our community. So I want to thank you very much for coming and giving such attention specifically to Woodpark issues. I also want to thank everyone for coming and for asking such great questions. It's really nice to see a good group of people out on well, they're not out there, they're at their house, and maybe it was a good choice to stay at their house because maybe people participated a little bit more, but great to see the turnout because I know everybody is busy. Maybe I want to leave the last word to the councillor. Is there anything you wanted to add, or shall we just say good night to everybody?
I think everyone's pretty tired. Thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you, Jocelyn and Peter, for a great presentation. And yes, keep those comments coming. And these guys are working through those questions for you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Good night. And this will be available on a website in a couple of days for any of your neighbors that may have missed it, or family members or whatever. So thanks, everybody, and have a good evening.
Good night.